My parents called it a lesson in independence. At 22, when they refused to pay for my college while remodeling their kitchen, they said struggling would build my character. For 9 years, I believed them. I took the loans, worked the night shifts, and never asked for a cent. I thought I had survived them. Then a letter arrived from a trust I didn't know existed, and I realized my struggle hadn't built my character. It had only funded theirs. The heavy cream-colored envelope from Brighton City University sat in the center of the kitchen island like a peace treaty that had already been violated. It was heavy stock, embossed with a crimson seal, the kind of paper that whispered of old money and high stakes. I had read the acceptance letter 5 times before bringing it downstairs. I had calculated the tuition costs, the room and board, and the terrifying gap between what the federal government offered and what the university demanded. My father, Mark, was wiping down the granite countertops with a methodical circular motion. He paused when I slid the letter toward him, but he did not pick it up. "That is wonderful, Stella," he said. His voice was even, pleasant, the tone of a man discussing the weather rather than his daughter's future. "We knew you would get in. You have always been bright." I waited. My mother, Cynthia, was standing by the new espresso machine, a chrome beast that had cost $2,000 just last month. She was frothing milk, the loud hiss filling the silence that Mark left behind. She tapped the metal pitcher on the counter and turned to face me. Her smile tight and perfectly curated. "Brighton is expensive," Cynthia said. She did not look at the letter. She looked at the fresh lilies in the vase behind it. "Have you thought about how you are going to handle the logistics?" I felt a cold prickle at the base of my neck. We had discussed this. For years, the assumption had been that if I worked hard, if I got the grades, if I did everything right, the money set aside for education would be there. I was hoping we could discuss the tuition. I said, keeping my voice steady. "The financial aid package covers about 30%. I can take out the maximum federal loans, but there is still a shortfall of about $22,000 for the first year." Mark set down his rag. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms over his chest. He looked like a catalog model for responsible fatherhood. Cashmere sweater, salt and pepper hair, a look of calm wisdom. "Stella," he said, "we have been talking about this. Your mother and I have done a lot of thinking. We want you to succeed. We really do. But we believe that handing you a check for that amount of money would be doing you a disservice." I stared at him. I could hear the refrigerator humming. "A disservice? Independence is the best gift we can give you." Cynthia chimed in. She poured the milk into her coffee, creating a perfect Rosetta pattern. "If we pay for everything, you will never learn the value of the investment. You will never feel the weight of your own choices. We want you to build character." Character. I looked around the kitchen. We lived in Cedar Hollow, Vermont, in a house that had been featured in a regional lifestyle magazine 3 years ago. The floors were reclaimed oak. The windows were double-paned thermal glass installed last autumn to cut down on heating bills that they never struggled to pay anyway. Outside, in the driveway, sat the new SUV Mark had purchased in cash just before Christmas. "You are cutting me off?" I asked. The words felt clumsy in my mouth. "We are empowering you," Mark corrected gently. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a single sheet of printer paper. He slid it across the island, right over the acceptance letter. I looked down. It was a spreadsheet, a budget. He had listed hypothetical rent, grocery costs based on generic brands, and a projected minimum wage income. Beneath that, he had stapled a printed list of local job openings in Marrowgate. Diners, retail stores, janitorial services. "I printed this out for you," Mark said, tapping the paper with his index finger. "It is a roadmap. If you work 30 hours a week while taking classes, and if you live in the cheapest dorm, the numbers almost work. You might have to take a gap year to save up first. Of course, but that is part of the journey. 30 hours a week?" I looked up at him. "I am a biology major. Dad, the labs alone are 12 hours a week. If I work 30 hours, when do I sleep?" "You will figure it out," Cynthia said brightly. She took a sip of her latte. That is the point, Stella. The struggle is the lesson. When I was your age, nobody handed me anything. That was a lie. I knew for a fact that Grandfather Hale had bought Cynthia her first car and paid for her degree in art history, a degree she had never used for a single day of employment. But pointing that out would only make me sound ungrateful. That was the trap they set. Any objection was proof of entitlement. I am not asking for a free ride. I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. I will work. I have worked every summer since I was 16. But $22,000? I cannot make that waiting tables part-time while studying organic chemistry. Can you at least co-sign a private loan? Mark sighed. A long, disappointed sound. We cannot do that. Stella, co-signing would link our credit to yours. If you defaulted, it would impact our financial standing. We have to protect the family's future. You understand that, do not you? The family's future. I looked at the budget sheet. It was clean, orderly, and completely impossible. It was a fantasy of poverty written by a man who had not worried about the price of milk in 20 years. Okay, I said quietly. I picked up the acceptance letter. I picked up the budget sheet. That is the spirit, Mark said, smiling. He looked relieved that I had not made a scene. You will thank us for this one day. I walked out of the kitchen, my legs feeling heavy and numb. I went upstairs to my room and closed the door, sliding down against the wood until I hit the floor. I did not cry. Crying was a currency that had no value in this house. 2 days later, I found the receipt on the counter in the mudroom. I was looking for my keys, digging through the pile of mail that had accumulated near the garage door. It was a printout from a travel agency, stapled to a lease agreement. I should not have read it. I should have just kept looking for my keys. But the name caught my eye. Evan Jenkins. My brother was 19. He had barely scraped through high school with a C average and a suspension for vaping in the locker room. He had decided he needed to find himself before committing to college. The document was a lease for a one-bedroom apartment in downtown Burlington. The monthly rent was $1,800. The deposit, first and last month's rent, totaling $5,400, had been paid by a check from the joint account of Mark and Cynthia Jenkins. Beneath that was an itinerary for a flight to Costa Rica for a 2-week wellness retreat, paid in full. And beneath that, a recurring transfer setup form, monthly allowance, $1,200. I stood there in the mudroom, the smell of wet boots and expensive cedar closet liners filling my nose. My hands were shaking. I read the numbers again, 5,000, 1,800, 1,200. They were funding his entire life. They were paying for him to sit in an apartment and play video games, to fly to a beach and meditate, to eat takeout and do absolutely nothing. The door from the garage opened. Mark walked in, carrying his golf bag. He stopped when he saw me holding the papers. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed, like I had walked in on him in the bathroom. Put that down. Stella, he said, that is private. You are paying for his apartment? I asked. My voice was very quiet. You are giving him an allowance? Evan is in a different place than you are, Mark said, swinging the golf bag off his shoulder. He needs a soft place to land right now. He is fragile. We are investing in his mental health. Fragile. Evan wasn't fragile. He was lazy. You told me independence was a gift. I said, you told me you could not help me because it would ruin my character. But you are paying $6,000 so Evan can have a gap year? It is an internship, Mark said, stepping past me. It says, wellness retreat. Dad, stop counting other people's money. Stella, he snapped. His calm mask slipped for a second, revealing the irritation underneath. It is unbecoming. We do what is right for each child individually. You are strong. You can handle the world. Evan needs support. If we helped you, you would never reach your potential. We are doing this because we believe in you. He walked into the kitchen and closed the door. I stood in the mudroom, holding the proof of my own worthlessness in my hands. It wasn't about money. It was about the fact that they looked at me and saw a workhorse, and they looked at Evan and saw a pet. They were willing to pay for his comfort, but they demanded my suffering. I folded the papers and put them back on the counter. I made a decision in that cold, quiet room. I would not ask them again. I would not beg. If they wanted me to be independent, I would be so independent it would terrify them. I left for Massachusetts 3 weeks later. I did not let them drive me. I took a bus, hauling 2 suitcases and a backpack through the terminal, sweating in the humid August heat. Brighton City University was a sprawl of red brick and ivy, beautiful and intimidating, but I didn't go to the quad or the welcome mixer. My first stop was the financial aid office. The room was lit by humming fluorescent tubes that turned everyone's skin a sickly shade of green. The air smelled of toner and anxiety. I sat across from a clerk named Mrs. Gable, a woman with kind eyes and a desk piled high with manila folders. She pushed the promissory note toward me. "This is the unsubsidized Stafford loan," she explained, pointing with a ballpoint pen. "And this is the private loan you were approved for. The interest rate is higher on this one, 9%. Interest begins accruing immediately." I looked at the number at the bottom of the page. It was more money than I had ever seen. It was a chain around my neck that would drag behind me for decades. "I just sign here?" I asked. Mrs. Gable nodded. "Right there." My hand hovered over the paper. I thought of the budget sheet Mark had printed. I thought of Evan's apartment in Burlington. I felt a hot pressure behind my eyes, a stinging wave of tears that wanted to spill over. I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted copper. I would not cry. Not here. Not in front of this woman. Not for them. I signed my name. Stella Jenkins. The ink looked black and permanent. I did it again on the next page, and the next. By the time I walked out of that office, I owned $70,000 of debt, and I was entirely free. My life in Marrowgate became a mathematical equation of survival. Sleep was the variable I could manipulate. Money was the constant I could not change. I woke up at 4:30 in the morning. I worked the opening shift at the campus library, shelving books in the silence of the stacks, while the rest of the student body was sleeping off hangovers. The rhythm of it, slide, shelve, push, became a meditation. I liked the dust. I liked the quiet. Classes ran from 9 until 2. I sat in the front row, taking notes with a ferocity that scared the freshmen sitting next to me. I could not afford to miss a detail. I could not afford to fail a quiz. Every credit hour cost me hundreds of dollars. Wasting time felt like burning cash. From 3 to 6, I tutored high school students in chemistry. I charged $20 an hour. Cash. I was good at it. I could explain stoichiometry to a distracted 16-year-old because I made it about recipes. I needed that cash for food. The meal plan was too expensive, so I ate protein bars and apples and instant oatmeal made with tap water. At 7, I clocked in at the Gilded Fork, a mid-range bistro near the harbor. I was a hostess. I spent 5 hours standing in heels, smiling at people who looked past me, walking them to tables where they would spend more on a bottle of wine than I spent on groceries for a month. I learned to sleep in bursts, 20 minutes on a library beanbag, 3 hours between the end of my shift and my alarm. My eyes developed permanent dark circles that no amount of concealer could hide. My skin grew pale. I lost 8 pounds in the first semester because eating took time I did not have. I did not call home. When Mark or Cynthia texted, usually vague, cheery messages like, "Hope you are settling in," or "Send us a picture of your dorm," I waited 2 days to reply. I sent one-word answers. Good, busy, fine. I was building a wall, brick by brick, shift by shift. I met Naomi Reyes in the laundry room of the basement dormitory during my 2nd month. It was midnight. I was staring at a washing machine that had swallowed my quarters and refused to start. I was so tired that I was considering just kicking the machine until it broke or I broke. "Kick it on the bottom left corner," a voice said. I turned around. A girl with sharp eyeliner and hair pulled back in a severe bun was sitting on a folding table, reading a textbook on constitutional law. She was wearing oversized sweatpants and eating dry cereal out of a box. "The sensor is loose," she said without looking up. "You have to jar it. I kicked the machine. It whirred to life. "Thanks," I said, leaning against the dryer. "You are the girl who falls asleep in the library carols," she said. She closed her book. "I am Naomi. Pre-law. I sleep 4 hours a night and I hate everyone. I am Stella." I said, "Biology. I sleep 3 hours, and I'm too tired to hate anyone yet." Naomi snorted. "Give it time. We became friends in the way soldiers become friends. It wasn't about giggling over boys or going to parties. It was about survival." Naomi saw through my act immediately. She saw the budget spreadsheet I kept in my planner. She saw the way I hoarded free bagels from university events. She never offered me money. She knew I would have refused it. Instead, she offered me strategy. When the financial aid office tried to drop one of my grants because of a filing error, Naomi marched into the administration building with me. She cited 3 different subsections of the student handbook and stared at the administrator until he typed the correction. "They count on you being too exhausted to fight," Naomi told me as we walked out. "That is how the system works. Stella, paperwork is just a weapon they use to bore you into submission. You have to be more boring than they are." She taught me how to file appeals. She showed me which vending machines gave free sodas if you pressed the buttons in a certain sequence. She sat with me in the library at 2 a.m, neither of us talking. Just the sound of pages turning and the silent understanding that we were climbing a mountain with no safety gear. She never pitied me. That was why I loved her. Pity was what Mark and Cynthia would have offered if I had failed. Naomi only offered respect. By the middle of my sophomore year, I had stabilized. I wasn't thriving, but I wasn't drowning. I had a rhythm. Doctor. Lillian Hart was the first person to threaten that stability with kindness. She was my organic chemistry professor, a woman in her 60s with wild gray hair and a reputation for failing half her class. I loved her. She was precise. She did not tolerate laziness. I was cleaning up the lab after a practical exam. I was not supposed to be there, but I had stayed behind to double-check my titration results. "Miss Jenkins, doctor," Hart said. She was standing in the doorway of her office. I froze. I thought I was in trouble. "Yes, doctor." "Hart, you received the highest score on the midterm." She said, 98%. The next closest score was an 84. "Thank you," I said, shifting my backpack on my shoulder. "I need a research assistant for the summer." She said, "We are modeling enzyme kinetics. It is tedious work. Data entry, sample preparation, washing glassware, but it pays $15 an hour, and I will put your name on the paper if we publish." I stared at her. $15 an hour. That was $3 more than the library, and it was in my field. It was a lifeline. But the instinct to run flared up. Why was she offering this? What was the catch? Mark and Cynthia had taught me that help always came with strings. Help was a prelude to control. "I have a job at a restaurant," I said defensively. "I cannot quit. I need the hours." "Doctor." Hart looked at me over her glasses. Her eyes were shrewd. She looked at my frayed cuffs, my tired eyes, the tension in my jaw. "The grant allows for flexible hours," she said calmly. "You can come in at night. You can come in on weekends. I do not care when the work gets done. As long as it gets done." I hesitated. "Why?" I asked. "Why me?" "Because you work like you are running out of time," she said, "and because you are the only student who actually reads the footnotes in the textbook. Do you want the job or not?" I took a breath. "I want it. Good. Start Monday." I walked out of the science building feeling lighter than I had in 2 years. A research position, a mentor, someone who valued my work, not my compliance. I pulled out my phone to check the time. A notification popped up from Facebook. Mark Jenkins added a new photo. I stopped on the sidewalk. I shouldn't have looked. I had hidden their posts from my timeline. But the algorithm had pushed this one through. It was a professional photo. The lighting was golden and warm. It had been taken at the country club, on the stone patio overlooking the golf course. Mark was in a navy blazer, looking distinguished. Cynthia was wearing a silk dress that shimmered in the light. Evan was there, too, looking tan and fit from his gap year. wearing a crisp linen shirt. They were laughing, their heads thrown back, looking like the perfect American family. I recognized the day. I had been there. It was taken the summer before I left. At a cousin's wedding, I had been standing right next to Evan. I had been wearing a blue dress I bought at a thrift store. But I wasn't in the photo. The image had been cropped. The edge of the frame cut right through the space where my shoulders should have been. I had been erased. I read the caption. So proud of our family. Watching our kids chase their dreams is the greatest joy of our lives. Blessed family. First, proud parents. I stood there on the busy sidewalk. People rushing past me to get to class. The wind bit at my face. Watching our kids chase their dreams. They were taking credit for me. They were using my independence, the struggle they had forced on me. The nights I spent scrubbing tables and shelving books, as a prop for their public image. They wanted the prestige of having a daughter in university without the inconvenience of supporting her. If I succeeded, it was because of their parenting. If I failed, it was because of my choices. I looked at the empty space where I used to be. Something hard and cold settled in my chest. It wasn't sadness. Sadness was soft. This was iron. I saved the photo. I put it in a folder on my phone. I vowed then, standing under the gray Massachusetts sky, that I would never let them back in. I would not ask them for a dime. I would not ask them for a reference. I would not ask them for comfort when I was sick or praise when I won. I would become a ghost to them. I would be the success story they claimed, but I would belong entirely to myself. I walked to the library. I studied for 4 hours. I went to the bistro and worked a double shift. I came home and wrote my lab report until 3 a.m. 2 days later, just before I fell asleep, my phone buzzed with an email. From Mark Jenkins. Subject, checking in, hi Stella. We saw the Dean's List announcement online. We are proud of you for doing it the right way. We knew you could handle it. Love. Dad. I stared at the glowing screen in the dark, doing it the right way. It sounded like a compliment, but I knew what it really was. It was a confirmation that my suffering was their design. It was a pat on the head for a dog that had learned to stop barking. I didn't reply. I turned off the phone, pulled the thin dormitory blanket up to my chin, and closed my eyes. I had an exam in 5 hours. I didn't have time for their pride. I only had time for my survival. The years between 22 and 26 did not feel like a progression of time. They felt like a holding pattern of sustained panic. I stopped thinking about the future as a concept and started treating it as a series of immediate financial threats that had to be neutralized one by one. My grades remained perfect. I carried a 4.0 GPA like a shield, terrified that if I let it slip even a fraction, the fragile architecture of my scholarships would collapse. But the cost of that perfection was physical. By my junior year, I had developed a permanent tremor in my left eyelid. I ground my teeth so hard in my sleep that I woke up with headaches that radiated down my neck and into my shoulders. I cracked a molar in the spring of my 3rd year and simply lived with the sharp, throbbing pain for 6 months because I could not justify the $400 for a dentist visit. I lived in a state of high-alert frugality. If I bought a coffee, I felt guilty for 3 hours. If I needed new shoes, I taped the soles of my old ones until the rubber disintegrated. I was terrified of the unexpected. A parking ticket, a flu bug, a textbook that wasn't available in the library. One variable could destroy the equation. It was during this high-wire act that I found the Alderwood Promise Fund. It was a merit-based scholarship offered by a private nonprofit, specifically designed for students in STEM fields who demonstrated exceptional resilience. The award was $10,000. $10,000. To me, that number was abstract, almost mythological. It was enough to pay off my high-interest private loan. It was enough to fix my tooth. It was enough to let me sleep for more than 4 hours a night. I applied with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I wrote essays about my research with Dr. Hart. I gathered recommendations. I submitted my transcripts. When I received the preliminary notification that I was a finalist, I allowed myself a single moment of hope. I stood in the hallway of the biology building, staring at the email on my phone, and felt my shoulders drop an inch. Then, silence. The disbursement date passed. The funds did not appear in my student account. I went to the financial aid office, but they told me it was an external award and I had to contact the foundation directly. I emailed. I called. For weeks. I got nothing but automated responses. Finally, in October of my senior year, I received a short, confusing email from the Alderwood program director. Dear Ms. Jenkins, regarding your inquiry, our records indicate that the final verification paperwork was never returned by the deadline. As such, the award was forfeited and reallocated to an alternate candidate. I stared at the screen. The air in the computer lab felt suddenly thin. Never returned? I had checked the portal every day. I had never received a verification form. I called Naomi. She was in her first year of law school by then, sharper and even more cynical than before. She met me at the campus coffee shop, looking at my laptop screen with narrowed eyes. Log into their portal, Naomi said. She didn't offer sympathy. She offered forensics. I logged in. The interface was clunky, a legacy system that hadn't been updated in a decade. Naomi took the mouse. She clicked through the Sent Documents tab, then into the Profile settings. She stopped. Her finger hovered over the screen. Stella, she said slowly, why is your mailing address listed as Cedar Hollow? I leaned in. There it was, under current correspondence address. The street address wasn't my apartment in Marrowgate. It was my parents' house in Vermont. I didn't change that, I said. My voice sounded hollow. I changed everything to my apartment address freshman year. Look at the timestamp on the edit, Naomi said. Last updated. August 14th, 2 months ago. Someone had logged in and manually changed the mailing address just before the verification forms were sent out. I felt a cold, sick sensation in my stomach. It wasn't a glitch. A glitch didn't know my parents' zip code. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but my mind was icy. I dialed home. Cynthia answered on the second ring. Hello? Her voice was bright, breathless. She sounded like she had just come in from the garden. Mom, I said, I skipped the pleasantries. Did you receive any mail for me in August? From the Alderwood Promise Fund? There was a pause, a beat of silence that lasted just a second too long. Oh, Stella, Cynthia said. Her tone shifted, becoming smooth and conciliatory. I was going to tell you about that. It looked like junk mail. Honestly, just some bureaucratic nonsense. It was a scholarship. Mom, $10,000. Did you open it? Well, of course I opened it, she said, sounding offended. It came to the house. I am your mother. I handle your mail when you are not here. I am not there, I said, gripping the phone. I haven't lived there in 3 years. Why was it sent there? Did you change my address in the portal? I was trying to help, she said. The defensiveness was creeping in now. You are so busy. Stella, you are always talking about how tired you are. I thought if I handled the administrative side, you could focus on your studies. We didn't want you distracted by extra obligations. Extra obligations? I almost laughed, but it would have sounded like a scream. It was money. It was $10,000. Where is the form? Mom? I sent it back, she said breezily. I filled it out for you. I didn't want you to miss the deadline. But honestly, the questions were so intrusive. Asking about our household income? It felt inappropriate. You signed it? I asked. I signed for you. Yes, it is called acting as a proxy. Parents do it all the time. But you didn't just sign it, did you? I pressed. The email says it wasn't completed. What did you do? I filled it out to the best of my ability, Cynthia said, but I may have left a few sections blank. I wasn't going to give some random nonprofit our tax returns. Stella, that is private information. If they denied you because we protect our privacy, then it wasn't a legitimate scholarship anyway. I closed my eyes. I could see it perfectly. She had received the form. She had seen that it required financial disclosure that might contradict the narrative that they were broke, or disclosure that might reveal financial maneuvering I didn't understand. So she had sabotaged it. She had filled it out halfway, forged my signature, and mailed it back to Di. "You cost me $10,000, I said quietly. "Money comes and goes." "Stella," she said, dismissing the sum as if it were pocket change. "What matters is that you learn to manage your own affairs. If you had been more on top of it, maybe you would have caught it sooner. We are just trying to support you." She was twisting it, in real time. She was rewriting reality so that her interference was actually a lesson in my own negligence. I hung up. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I sat there in the coffee shop, listening to the espresso machine grind beans, and I felt something inside me harden into permanent bedrock. That was the moment I stopped being their daughter and started being their case manager. "Start a folder," Naomi said. She was watching me closely. "What?" "A folder," she repeated, "digital and physical. Screenshots of the portal. Download the call log from your cell provider showing the duration of that call. Write down exactly what she said while it is fresh in your memory." "Why?" I asked. "It is gone. The money is gone. Because this isn't normal." "Stella," Naomi's voice was low, "normal parents don't hack into your accounts to redirect mail. Normal parents don't forge signatures on legal documents. This isn't just strict parenting. This is interference. And you need insurance." I took her advice. I went back to my apartment and created a folder on my encrypted hard drive. I named it SJ_records. I put the screenshot of the address change in there. I typed out a transcript of the conversation with Cynthia. I told myself I wasn't building a case for vengeance. I didn't have the energy for revenge. I just wanted to make sure that the next time they tried to gaslight me, the next time they told me I was remembering it wrong, I would have proof that I was sane. But the investigation wasn't over. 2 weeks later, I was called into the financial aid office again. I expected another generic meeting about loan disbursement dates. Instead, I was directed to a small office in the back, occupied by a man named Mason Klein. Mason was young, maybe 30, with sleeves rolled up to his elbows and a desk covered in stacks of paper. He didn't look like a bureaucrat. He looked like an overworked auditor who had found a discrepancy that bothered him. "Sit down, Stella," he said. He didn't smile. He looked at his computer screen, then at me. "I have been reviewing the senior audits. There is something weird in your file." "Weird how?" I asked. My pulse spiked. He turned the monitor so I could see. It was a timeline of my financial aid history. Here, he pointed to an entry from my freshman year. And here, again in sophomore year, there are flags for a family contribution pledge. I frowned. "I don't know what that is." "It is a form," Mason explained, "usually used by wealthy families who want to lower their child's loan burden. The parents sign a document pledging to pay a specific amount, say $5,000, directly to the university. Because that money is pledged, the federal government subtracts it from your need calculation. It lowers the amount of subsidized loans you are eligible for." I stared at him. "My parents never paid a cent." "Exactly," Mason said. "That is the problem. The pledge was filed. Your loan eligibility was reduced because the system expected that cash. But the cash never came. Then, right before the penalty date, the pledge was withdrawn. Withdrawn? Canceled. But by then, the deadline for subsidized loans had passed. So the system automatically shifted you to unsubsidized loans and private gap financing." He looked at me, his expression serious. "Stella, this happened 3 years in a row. It cost you thousands in interest. It forced you into higher rate debt, and it made it look like you, or your family, were reneging on commitments." "Who filed the pledge?" I asked, though I already knew. "It was submitted electronically," Mason said, "under the parent login, Mark Jenkins." I sat back in the chair. It was elegant in its cruelty. It wasn't just that they refused to pay. They had actively manipulated the system to make it look like they were going to pay, purely to block me from getting cheaper government aid. They had sabotaged my independence while preaching it. "Why?" I whispered. Mason hesitated. "I can't speculate on intent, but sometimes Sometimes people use these accounts to show assets on paper for other reasons: credit applications, mortgage refinancing, showing that they have educational liabilities, can sometimes be used to offset income in certain creative accounting structures. Or maybe they just wanted to control exactly how much help the government gave you. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. "I can't fix the interest you have already accrued," Mason said quietly, "but I can flag your file for a full audit before graduation. If we can prove those pledges were never real, we might be able to reclassify some of your debt retroactively. It is a long shot, but it is worth trying." "Do it," I said. I walked out of his office into the winter air. The campus looked beautiful, snow dusting the brick walkways, students laughing in puffy coats. I felt entirely detached from it. I went home and opened the SJ_records folder. I added a new document: Mason Klein, audit notes, family contribution pledges. For the next few months, I lived with a dull, vibrating anger. I questioned everything. I would wake up in the middle of the night thinking, did I misunderstand? Did they explain this to me and I forgot? Maybe Mark tried to help and just couldn't make the payments. Then I would catch myself. That was their voice in my head. That was the training. They had raised me to believe that any failure was my failure, and any confusion was my lack of intellect. I had to fight to trust my own memory. I had to look at the documents in my folder like they were holy scripture, the only truth I could rely on. Graduation day arrived in May. It was unseasonably hot. The ceremony was held on the main quad, thousands of folding chairs arranged on the grass. Mark and Cynthia drove down. They arrived in the new SUV, the one Mark had bought the year they cut me off. It was 3 years old now, but looked brand new. They met me near the biology department tent. Cynthia was wearing a cream-colored dress and a wide-brimmed hat. Mark was in a linen suit. They looked stunning. They looked like the parents on the brochure. "Stella!" Cynthia cried, rushing forward to hug me. She smelled of expensive perfume and hairspray. "We are so proud." I let her hug me. I stood stiffly in my black gown, the polyester heavy and suffocating in the heat. "You made it," Mark said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. He squeezed it, a gesture that felt possessive. I did. I said, the ceremony was a blur of speeches about potential and the future. I sat there, clutching my diploma cover, thinking about the negative net worth attached to my name. I thought about the audit Mason was running. I thought about the family contribution pledge. When it was over, we stood for photos. Cynthia directed the scene like a photographer. "Move a little to the left. Mark. Stella. Hold the diploma higher. Smile. Honey, you look so serious." I smiled. It was a rictus of compliance. After the photos, we walked toward the parking lot. I was exhausted. I just wanted to go to my apartment, take off the gown, and sleep for a week. Mark stopped by the car. He looked at the campus, then at me. He had a satisfied, almost smug expression on his face. "You know," he said, opening the car door, "we took a lot of heat from people when we said we weren't paying. Our friends at the club thought we were harsh." He laughed, a short, sharp sound. "But look at you," he said. "You graduated with honors. You learned how to budget. You learned grit." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "See? We knew you would manage without us. It was the making of you." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had filed false pledges to ruin my loan rates. I looked at the woman who had forged my signature to lose me $10,000. It wasn't a lesson. "Dad," I said, "it was an obstacle course, and you won." He said, beaming, "That is the point." They drove away. They didn't offer to buy me dinner. They had a reservation at a bed and breakfast in the next town over. Just the two of them. They said they wanted to celebrate my achievement by having a quiet night. I went back to my apartment alone. I ordered a pizza and ate it sitting on the floor, still wearing my graduation cap. 2 days later, the mail arrived. I was packing boxes, preparing to move to Rhode Island for the job I had landed at North Bay Strategy Group. I was sorting through the stack of envelopes, final utility bills, junk mail, coupons. There was a large, flat envelope at the bottom, It had been forwarded. The yellow sticker from the post office was slapped over the front. FWD. Cedar Hollow to Marrowgate. I turned it over. The return address was the Alderwood Promise Fund. My heart hammered against my ribs. I tore it open. Inside was a certificate, heavy paper, gold foil border, Certificate of Achievement, awarded to Stella Jenkins, 2022 recipient of the Alderwood Promise Scholarship. It was dated 8 months ago. I pulled out the letter behind it. Dear Stella, we are pleased to confirm your selection. Funds have been disbursed to the account on file. Disbursed? I looked at the envelope again. I looked at the postmark. It had been mailed to Cedar Hollow in September. It had arrived at my parents' house, and there, in faint red ink near the bottom right corner, was a stamp from the Cedar Hollow post office. Received/picked up. They had picked it up. They had the confirmation. They knew I had won. Which meant when Cynthia told me on the phone that the paperwork was never completed, she was holding the acceptance letter in her hand. She hadn't just sabotaged the application. She had intercepted the victory, and the line, "Funds have been disbursed to the account on file?" I went to my computer. I opened the SJ_records folder. I scanned the letter and saved it. I didn't call them. I didn't ask where the money went. I knew that if I asked, they would have an answer. A story about a mistake, a clerical error, a savings account they were holding for me. I realized then that the audit Mason had started wasn't enough. The spreadsheet wasn't enough. They weren't just bad parents. They were thieves. And they had been stealing from me while I was thanking them for the lesson. I taped the box shut. I labeled it Personal Documents. I carried it out to my beat-up car, the one I had bought with money I earned scrubbing tables. I drove away from Marrowgate, heading south to Rhode Island. I didn't look back. I was done with independence. Now, I was interested in accounting. Harborside, Rhode Island, was a city built on the concept of old money. But I lived in the new money district, the part where young professionals in crisp blazers drank $14 lattes and pretended they were not drowning in law school debt. I was 27, then 28, then 29. The years moved with the smooth, frictionless glide of a high-speed train. I had landed a job as a junior associate at North Bay Strategy Group, a mid-sized consulting firm that specialized in efficiency. It was the perfect job for me. My entire life had become an exercise in efficiency. I streamlined corporate supply chains by day and by night. I streamlined my own existence. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a converted mill building. It had exposed brick walls and a view of the harbor if you craned your neck at a 45-degree angle. It was sparse. I owned a gray sofa, a glass coffee table, and a bookshelf organized by color. I didn't own clutter. Clutter felt like liability. My bank accounts were my religion. Every Friday, when my direct deposit hit, I executed a ritual of transfers, rent, utilities, loan repayment, emergency fund. I paid more than the minimum on my student loans. Attacking the principal with a vengeance that felt personal, I watched the balance decrease. 60,000, 55,000, 48,000, and felt a dopamine hit stronger than any drug. I was safe. That was the word I whispered to myself when I locked the deadbolt at night. Safe, but safety required isolation. I dated. Occasionally, there was a graphic designer named Ben who had nice hands and a gentle laugh. We went out for 3 months. He was kind. He wanted to cook for me. He wanted to buy me tickets to concerts. The first time he tried to pay for my dinner, a simple pasta dish at an Italian place on Federal Hill, I felt a physical recoil in my chest. He put his card down, and I immediately reached for my purse, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "I have it," I said. Too quickly. "Stella, it is just dinner." He laughed, pushing my hand away gently. "I asked you out. I am paying." I couldn't explain to him that there was no such thing as just dinner. In my world, money was never a gift. It was a down payment on future compliance. If he paid for pasta, what would he ask for later? What part of my autonomy was I selling for $24? I insisted. I made it awkward. I Venmo'd him my share before we even left the table. We broke up 2 weeks later. He told me I was emotionally unavailable. He said, "You act like I am trying to trap you every time I do something nice." He was right, of course. Intimacy felt like another kind of debt, one with variable interest rates and hidden fees. I preferred to stay solvent. Naomi remained my only real anchor. She was working at the Marrowgate Legal Aid Center now, fighting landlords and reviewing eviction notices. She visited me once a month. We would sit on my gray sofa, drinking cheap wine, and she would tell me about the injustices of the housing court while I analyzed her budget. "You live like a monk, Stella," she told me one rainy Saturday. She gestured to my empty walls. "Put up a picture, buy a plant. You are allowed to exist." "You know, I am existing." I said, "I am solvent. That is enough." My parents, Mark and Cynthia, were a low-level background noise, like the hum of a refrigerator you eventually learn to ignore. They had accepted my silence, or perhaps they just didn't care enough to challenge it. Cynthia had pivoted to a new strategy: performative warmth. She sent text messages filled with heart emojis and exclamation points. "Thinking of you. Hope the job is going well. Family is everything." She commented on my LinkedIn updates within minutes of me posting them. "So proud of our daughter." But the warmth always, inevitably, came with a request. It was never money. They were too smart for that now. It was always access. "Hi, honey. Just a quick question." A text would read, "We are updating the deed on the summer cabin. Since you are a potential heir, the lawyer just needs you to sign a waiver saying you have no current claims against the property." Standard stuff. "Can I email it?" Or, "Dad is restructuring his life insurance. We need to verify your social security number and current address for the beneficiary line. Can you call me?" I learned to say no. I learned to say it politely, without drama, using the corporate voice I had perfected at North Bay. "I am not comfortable signing anything without my own counsel reviewing it." I would text back, "I will not be providing that information over text. If the insurance company needs it, have them send me a formal request on their letterhead." Cynthia would retreat immediately. "Oh, don't be so silly. Stella, it is just family paperwork. But fine, we will handle it another way." Handle it another way. I never asked what another way meant. I assumed it meant they found a loophole or just forged ahead without me. I let it go because I was busy, and because I wanted to believe that if I kept my distance, I was safe. I was wrong. The crack in my fortress appeared on a Tuesday in November. I received a letter from a credit card issuer, a premium travel rewards card I had never heard of. I opened it standing over my recycling bin, expecting a pre-approved offer I could shred. It wasn't an offer, it was a rejection. "Dear applicant, thank you for your recent application. We regret to inform you that we are unable to approve your request for the Sapphire Horizon card at this time due to the following factors. 1. High utilization of existing revolving credit. 2. Recent delinquency on a closed account." I stared at the paper. The recycling bin smelled of coffee grounds. I hadn't applied for a card. I had one credit card, a basic cashback card with a $5,000 limit that I paid off in full every single month. My utilization was never above 10%. And delinquency? I had never missed a payment in my life. Not once. Not for a library book. Not for a utility bill. Not for a loan. I froze. It wasn't the panic of being broke. I had savings. It was the cold, creeping dread of the careful person who realizes the locks on the doors have been changed from the outside. I went to my laptop. My hands were trembling slightly, a fine tremor I couldn't suppress. I logged into the annual credit report site. I had checked it a year ago, and it had been clean. I pulled the report from all 3 bureaus. I scrolled past my student loans. I scrolled past my car lease, and there it was. Cedar Hollow Heritage Bank. Account type, revolving line of credit. Status, closed/paid in full. Date opened, October 2018. Date closed, August 2024. High balance, $15,000. Payment history, 30 days late, January 2023. 60 days late, February 2023. Paid collection, June 2024. I did the math. October 2018. I was a junior in college. I was eating instant oatmeal and working 3 jobs. Someone had opened a $15,000 line of credit in my name. They had used it, maxed it out, carried the balance for years, missed payments, and then, bizarrely, paid off the collection agency in a lump sum 2 months ago. The address associated with the account? 14 Maple Ridge Drive, Cedar Hollow, Vermont, my parents' house. I didn't call Naomi, not yet. I needed to see it. I needed to look someone in the eye. I took the next day off work. I told my boss I had a family emergency, which was technically the truth. I drove 4 hours north to Vermont. The leaves were gone, the trees bare and skeletal against a gray sky. Cedar Hollow Heritage Bank was a small, regional institution. It sat on the corner of Main Street. A brick building with white pillars that tried too hard to look like a monument. I walked in at 2 in the afternoon. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and floor wax. I sat down at the desk of a branch manager named Mr. Henderson. He was a man in his 50s with a comb-over and a tie that was too wide for the current decade. I placed my driver's license and the printed credit report on his desk. "This account," I said. My voice was very low, very calm. It was opened in my name. I did not open it. I want to see the original application. "Mr. Henderson adjusted his glasses. He typed something into his computer, frowning at the screen. He looked at my license, then back at the monitor. "Well, Ms. Jenkins, this account has been closed. It was paid off in full. There is a 0 balance. That is not the point." I said, "I didn't authorize it. Who signed the application?" He hesitated. He clicked his mouse a few times, looking uncomfortable. "This was opened quite a while ago. The digital records from 2018 are archived. Get them," I said. He sighed. Sensing that I wasn't going to leave, he picked up the phone and made a call to the back office. While we waited, he tried to make small talk. "You are Mark Jenkins's daughter, right? I see him at the Rotary Club. Good man. Generous donor to the hospital fund." I didn't smile. I stared at the bridge of his nose. A clerk brought a file folder. "Mr. Henderson opened it. He shuffled through a few papers. "Ah, here we go," he said. "It looks like a standard personal line of credit. Co-signed?" "No, not co-signed. Guaranteed." "Guaranteed by whom?" I asked. "By the Jenkins Family Trust," he said. He turned the paper around. There was a signature at the bottom. It was my name, Stella Jenkins. But the loop on the S was wrong. The slant was too vertical. It looked like someone trying to write like me, but with a heavy masculine hand. "That is not my signature." I said, "Mr." Henderson chuckled nervously. "Well, signatures change over time. Look, Mrs. Jenkins, I understand your concern. But the debt is paid. Your father handled most of the maintenance on this account as your authorized contact. He came in personally to settle the collection notice just a few months ago. Said it was a misunderstanding with the mail." He stopped. He seemed to realize he had said too much. "My father handled it?" I repeated. "Mr." Henderson pulled the file back. "Well, as the guarantor's representative, look, technically, since the account is in your name, you have a right to these documents, but I would suggest you talk to Mark. Families often have these arrangements to build credit history for their children. It is a common strategy, a strategy. They had used my credit score as a sandbox. They had taken out $15,000. For what? A renovation? A vacation? Evan's wellness retreat? And then, when they got sloppy and missed payments, they paid it off to avoid a lawsuit. They weren't building my credit. They were strip mining it. I stood up. I took the photo of the signature with my phone before Mr. Henderson could stop me. "Thank you," I said. I walked out of the bank. The cold air hit my face, but I was burning. I drove to a gas station on the edge of town and called Naomi. I sat in my car, watching people pump gas, and explained everything. "Lock it down," Naomi said immediately. Her voice was sharp, professional. "I am going to—" I said, No, Stella. I mean nuclear option. Freeze your credit at all 3 bureaus today. Right now, put a fraud alert on your social security number. Change every password you have. Email, banking, student loans. Use a random generator. Do not use your mother's maiden name as a security question. I can't believe they did this. I said, I felt sick. It was a line of credit. Naomi, 15 grand. It wasn't about the 15 grand. Naomi said, it was about liquidity. They probably needed cash for something that didn't show up on their primary accounts. They used you as a shadow bank. What do I do? Do I call the police? Naomi paused. You could. It is identity theft, fraud. But if you file a police report, you are starting a war. An investigation will be opened. Mark could face charges. Is that what you want? I looked at the gas station convenience store. I imagined Mark in handcuffs. It felt like a scene from a movie. Not my life. I don't know. I said, then gather intel. Naomi advised, don't tip your hand. If you confront them now, they will shred everything. They will say you authorized it verbally. They will gaslight you until you think you are crazy. You need hard proof. You need to know the scope. Is it just this bank? Is it property? Is it the trust? The trust. Mr. Henderson had mentioned a trust. I drove back to Rhode Island in silence. I spent the night following Naomi's orders. I froze everything. I set up 2-factor authentication on every account. I requested a check systems report to see if any checking accounts had been opened in my name. I was building a firewall. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was Mark. Hi, Stella, he said. His voice sounded different, softer. There was a grit to it that I hadn't heard before, the sound of a man who was getting older. Hello, Dad. We haven't seen you in a while. He said, not since the graduation. Since you stole my scholarship. I thought, I have been busy. I said, I know. Cynthia tells me you are doing well at North Bay. We are proud of you. I waited. He cleared his throat. Look, Stella, I know things have been strained. We were hard on you, maybe too hard. We thought we were doing the right thing, teaching you resilience. But looking back, maybe we missed some moments to be gentler. I gripped the phone. This was new. Mark Jenkins did not apologize. He strategized. We want you to come for dinner, he said. Next Saturday, just us. Evan won't be there. We want a fresh start. We want to make things right. Make things right. The phrase triggered a memory of the bank manager. He came in personally to settle the collection notice. He wasn't calling because he missed me. He was calling because he had just paid off the debt he stuck me with, and he wanted to make sure I stayed quiet. He wanted to smooth over the cracks before I noticed them. Or maybe he knew I had visited the bank. Maybe Mr. Henderson had called him. If I refused, they would be suspicious. If I went, I might find out what else they were hiding. Okay, I said, I will come. Saturday evening, I pulled into the driveway of the house in Cedar Hollow. It had changed again. The siding had been replaced with a modern, slate gray composite. The landscaping was manicured to within an inch of its life. It looked like a fortress of upper-middle-class security. Cynthia met me at the door. She looked thinner, her face tighter, perhaps from stress or perhaps from a recent procedure. She hugged me, and her body felt frail. Stella, you look wonderful, very professional. She ushered me into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the wedding crystal. Mark was pouring wine. He looked older. Indeed, his hair was fully white now, and there was a slight tremor in his hand as he held the bottle. We sat. We ate roast beef that was slightly overcooked. The conversation was a minefield of carefully avoided topics. We talked about the weather. We talked about the Patriots. We talked about the local zoning board. Finally, as the plates were cleared, Mark leaned back. We are getting older, Stella, he said. He swirled his wine. And we are starting to think about legacy, about the future. He looked at Cynthia. She nodded. A tight, rehearsed movement. We know we pushed you away, Mark said, And we respect the life you have built. You are independent. You don't need us. And that is, well, that is what we wanted, even if it hurts a little." He reached under the table and pulled out a leather folder. It was burgundy, expensive, smelling of tanning oil and money. "We want you to have this," he said, sliding it across the polished wood. "What is it?" I asked. I didn't touch it yet. "It is the Jenkins family records," Cynthia said softly, "copies of important documents. We are simplifying our estate. We want you to know where things stand. It is for your future." Mark put his hand on top of the folder. "There are things in here about the family trust," he said, "about assets. We want you to be involved, Stella. We want you to come back into the fold, not as a dependent, but as a partner. A partner." I looked at his eyes. They were blue, watery, and seemingly sincere. But I remembered the budget sheet. I remembered the forged scholarship form. I remembered the paid collection on my credit report. He was buying my silence. He was offering me a cut of the pie to ensure I didn't ask how the pie was made. "Thank you," I said. I took the folder. I didn't open it there. I knew that if I opened it in front of them, my face would betray me. I left an hour later. Mark hugged me at the door. He held on for a second too long. "We are a family. Stella," he whispered. "That is the only thing that matters in the end." I drove back to Harborside in the dark, the leather folder sitting on the passenger seat like a passenger. When I got to my apartment, I poured a glass of water. I sat at my glass coffee table. I turned on the bright overhead light. I opened the folder. It was organized with tabs: life insurance, deeds, wills. I flipped to the back, a tab labeled Trust Structure. I pulled out a document titled Restatement of the Jenkins Hale Living Trust. I scanned the legalese. My eyes caught a list of assets: Cedar Hollow Heritage Bank, investment account; Vanguard, index fund; property, 14 Maple Ridge Drive; property, 882 River Road; commercial. Commercial property? I didn't know they owned commercial property. And then, the page listing beneficiaries: primary beneficiaries, Mark Jenkins; Cynthia Jenkins; secondary beneficiaries, 50-50 split, Evan Jenkins; Stella Jenkins. My name was there, typed in black and white, but it was the next page that made the room stop spinning. Schedule of distributions. Educational support maintenance. There was a log of withdrawals made from the trust. On behalf of Stella Jenkins. August 2018, $12,000. University housing support. January 2019, $10,500. Tuition assistance. August 2019, $14,000. Living expenses. I ran my finger down the column. According to this document, the trust had paid out over $80,000 for my education. I sat back, the breath leaving my lungs in a rush. I had paid for my education. I had the loan statements to prove it. I had the pay stubs from the bistro and the library. They hadn't just used my name to open a credit line. They had been withdrawing money from the family trust, money that was likely left by my grandfather, claiming it was for me, and they had kept it. They had embezzled $80,000 from the trust. Using my independence as the cover story, I looked at the folder. Jenkins family records. Mark had given this to me. Why? Was he arrogant? Sloppy? Or did he think I was so financially illiterate that I would see the numbers and assume they had secretly helped me? Or, and this thought chilled me the most, was this a setup? If I accepted this folder, if I accepted my role as partner, did I become complicit in the fraud? I reached for my phone. I didn't call Naomi. I took a picture of the distribution log. Then I walked to my closet and pulled down the box I had packed when I left Marrowgate. The box labeled personal documents. I found my loan promissory notes. I found my bank statements from 2018. I placed them side by side on the coffee table. Trust withdrawal, $10,500 for tuition. My bank statement, $0 received. My loan, disbursement, $10,500 sent to university. They had matched their theft to my real costs. They knew exactly how much I was borrowing, and they had withdrawn the exact same amount from the trust to pocket it. I wasn't a partner. I was a ghost employee. I was a shell company. I looked at the leather folder. It wasn't an olive branch. It was a ledger of crimes. And now I had the evidence. I closed the folder. I didn't feel safe anymore, but I didn't feel afraid either. I felt like the independent woman they had built, and I was ready to collect what was owed. The leather folder sat on my coffee table for 3 days before I touched it again. It felt radioactive. Every time I walked past it on my way to the kitchen, I could feel the weight of the lies inside. Jenkins Family Records. It was a title that suggested heritage, but the contents were an indictment. I spent those 3 nights researching the name on the trust document, the Jenkins Hale Living Trust. Graham Hale was my mother's father. He had been a quiet, stern man who made his money in textile manufacturing before the industry moved overseas. He died during my sophomore year of college. I remembered the phone call. Mark had called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was shelving books at the library. "Your grandfather passed away last night," Mark had said. "The funeral is on Friday. But honestly, Stella, with your exam schedule and the cost of the train ticket, he would not want you to disrupt your education. We will say a prayer for you." I hadn't gone. I had stayed in Marrowgate, studying for organic chemistry and eating ramen, feeling a vague, distant guilt that I couldn't afford to grieve. Now, looking at the trust documents, I realized my absence at the funeral hadn't been about preserving my grades. It had been about preserving their narrative. If I had gone to the funeral, I might have met the executor. I might have heard the reading of the will. I might have learned that Graham Hale had left a specific instruction to support his grandchildren. By keeping me away, they had kept me ignorant, and ignorance was the soil in which their fraud had grown. On Thursday, the letter arrived. It came to my apartment in Harborside, printed on thick, linen-textured stationery that cracked when I unfolded it. The letterhead read, "Briar Lusk Fiduciary Council," with an address in Wexler Falls, Connecticut. "Dear Ms. Jenkins, as a named beneficiary of the Jenkins Hale Living Trust, you are hereby notified that a restructuring of the trust assets is currently underway due to recent financial pressures and liquidity requirements. The trustees request your presence at a formal review meeting to discuss the allocation of remaining assets and to ratify prior distributions. Failure to attend may result in administrative determinations made in your absence. Date, November 14th. Location, 400 Mill Street, Suite 300, Wexler Falls. CT. I read the phrase ratify prior distributions 3 times. In corporate speak, the language I spoke fluently at North Bay Strategy Group, ratify meant retroactively approve something we already did. They wanted me to sign off on the history. They wanted me to bless the theft. I called Naomi. "Do not sign anything," Naomi said. Her voice was tinny over the car Bluetooth. She was driving to court. "Go to the meeting. Listen, take notes, but keep your hands in your lap. If they put a pen in front of you, treat it like a loaded gun. I am going." I said, "I want to see their faces when they ask me to ratify $80,000 I never saw. Be careful." "Stella," Naomi warned. "These are fiduciaries. They are professionals at making money disappear. If they are calling a meeting, it means they are scared of something." I took a personal day on the 14th. I dressed in my armor, a charcoal gray suit, black heels, and my hair pulled back in a severe, tight bun. I didn't wear jewelry. I didn't want to look like a family member attending a reunion. I wanted to look like an auditor. Wexler Falls was an hour west of Harborside, a town of colonial houses and manicured greens, where the hedges looked like they were trimmed with nail scissors. The offices of Briar Lusk were in a restored brick building overlooking a waterfall that had once powered a mill and now powered property values. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The lobby was silent, carpeted in a deep navy plush that absorbed the sound of my heels. A receptionist with a headset murmured my name and pointed toward a double mahogany door. I pushed it open. The conference room was vast, A long, oval table made of dark cherry wood dominated the space. At the far end, framed by a window revealing the gray November sky, sat 4 people. Mark and Cynthia were on the left. They looked impeccable. Cynthia was wearing a soft cashmere cardigan and oatmeal, a string of pearls around her neck. Mark wore a blazer and an open-collared shirt. They looked like they were posing for a retirement brochure. Across from them sat 2 strangers. One was a man in his 40s, sleek and polished, with a haircut that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. He had a gold pen resting on a yellow legal pad. This had to be Rowan Lusk. Next to him sat a woman who didn't fit the room. She was older, perhaps 60, wearing a sensible navy suit and reading glasses on a chain. She had no notes, no laptop. She sat with her hands folded on the table, watching the door. "Stella," Mark said. Standing up, he had that warm, benevolent smile plastered on his face. "We are so glad you could make it. Traffic can be a nightmare on the interstate." I didn't smile. I walked to the chair at the opposite end of the table, the position of opposition, and set my bag down. "Hello, Dad?" "Mom?" "This is Rowan Lusk," Mark said, gesturing to the sleek man. "He has been handling the family's legal affairs for years, and this is Elise Morrow. She is the independent trustee." Elise Morrow nodded to me. Her eyes were gray and uncomfortably sharp. She didn't smile. She just assessed. "Ms. Jenkins," Rowan said, his voice a smooth baritone. "Thank you for coming. We know you are a busy professional. We want to keep this efficient." He opened a folder. "As you know, the Jenkins Hale Trust was established by your grandfather to provide for the family's long-term security. The market has been volatile lately, and your parents have faced some liquidity challenges with the real estate portfolio." He glanced at Mark, who looked down at the table. "We are proposing a restructuring," Rowan continued. "Essentially, we need to dissolve a portion of the principal to cover outstanding liabilities. Since you are a vested beneficiary, we need your consent to alter the distribution schedule, and of course, to sign off on the accounting for the education subtrust, which is now depleted, the word hung in the air, sterile and final." I looked at Elise Morrow. She hadn't spoken yet. She was watching me, her head tilted slightly to the side. "I would like to see the accounting," I said. Rowan smiled, a condescending twitch of his lips. "Of course, we have a summary right here." He slid a single sheet of paper across the long table. I didn't pick it up. I leaned forward. "I don't want a summary. Mr. Lusk, I want the itemized ledger. I want to see dates, amounts, and recipients." Rowan sighed, tapping his gold pen. "That is a significant amount of data. Stella, we can have the paralegals compile it, but it will take weeks. Today, we really just need to agree on the broad strokes so we can protect the family's assets from—" "Ms. Jenkins has a right to the ledger," Elise Morrow said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through Rowan's smooth talk like a razor wire. Rowan stiffened. "Elise, we don't need to get bogged down in—" "She has a right," Elise repeated. She opened a file in front of her. "I have the ledger here." Elise slid a thick stack of stapled papers across the table. It slid heavily, stopping just inches from my hand. I picked it up. The room went very quiet. I could hear the hum of the HVAC system. I could hear Cynthia's shallow breathing. I opened to the first page. 2018 distributions. Payee: Jenkins family joint account via transfer. Memo: S. Jenkins, Housing Board, fall semester. Amount: $12,000. Payee: Jenkins family joint account via transfer. Memo: S. Jenkins, tuition support, spring semester. Amount: $10,500. I flipped the page. Payee: Hale Community Advancement Foundation. Memo: S. Jenkins, study abroad support. Amount: $6,000. I looked up. I never studied abroad. I said— Cynthia cleared her throat. She picked up her water glass, her hand trembling slightly. "Well, we planned for you to go. Stella, remember? We discussed it. The money was moved to be available for you. But you were so focused on working, we just rolled it into other expenses. Other expenses, I repeated. I looked at Mark. He was staring at a point on the wall just above my head, refusing to meet my eyes. I turned back to Elise. Ms. Morrow, I said, are you aware that I paid for my own college? Elise blinked, a slow, deliberate blink. I beg your pardon? She asked. I took out my own loans. I said, my voice was steady, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I worked 3 jobs. I graduated with $70,000 in debt. My parents told me they could not afford to help me. They told me independence was a lesson. I looked at the ledger again, but according to this, I said, tapping the paper, the trust paid out over $80,000 for my education. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a vacuum. Rowan Lusk stopped tapping his pen. Mark's jaw tightened, the muscles bunching under his skin. Cynthia let out a small, breathless laugh that sounded like a hiccup. Stella, honey, Cynthia said, you are misunderstanding the mechanics. The trust reimburses the family for the burden of support. Just because we didn't write a check directly to the school doesn't mean we weren't supporting you. We kept your room here. We paid for your health insurance. Mom, I cut her off. Health insurance was $200 a month. This ledger shows $14,000 for living expenses in 2019. I was living in a dorm room and eating peanut butter. Where did that money go? We were holding it for you, Mark snapped. He slammed his hand on the table, the sudden noise making everyone jump except Elise. We were investing it, he shouted, his face flushing red. We were trying to grow it so you would have a nest egg, but the market turned, and the renovation on the house went over budget. And we had to move things around. It is all family money. Stella, it all comes from the same pot. So you stole it. I said. Rowan Lusk intervened, his voice oily and fast. Let's not use inflammatory language. This is a matter of internal allocation. The trust grants the trustees broad discretion in how support is defined. If your parents determined that improving the family estate was in your long-term interest, that is a valid interpretation of. It is not a valid interpretation if the beneficiary was told she was penniless. Elise said. Elise was looking at me now, and there was something new in her eyes, not just assessment, validation. Ms. Morrow, Rowan warned, his voice dropping an octave. You are the administrative trustee. Your role is execution, not legal interpretation. My role is to ensure the grantor's intent is followed. Elise said. Graham Hale's intent was to educate his grandchildren, not to renovate a kitchen. She reached out and turned the ledger to a specific page. Look at entry 402, she said to me. I looked. Date, October 14th, 2022. Payee, Jenkins Family Joint Account. Memo, Alderwood Promise Matching Grant. Amount, $10,000. My stomach dropped. The room seemed to tilt. Alderwood, the scholarship I had won, the scholarship Cynthia had sabotaged by intercepting the mail. I looked at the date, October 2022. That was the exact month the scholarship check had been mailed to my parents' house. I looked at Elise. What is this? I whispered. The trust has a matching clause, Elise said quietly. Your grandfather wanted to encourage merit. The clause states that for every dollar of external scholarship money a beneficiary earns, the trust will release a matching dollar to the beneficiary. I understood it instantly. It was a mechanism of pure, efficient greed. They hadn't just stolen the $10,000 scholarship check from the Alderwood Fund. They had used that check as proof to unlock another $10,000 from the trust. They had turned my achievement into a $20,000 payday for themselves. And they had done it while I was sitting in my apartment in Marrowgate, crying because I couldn't afford to fix my cracked tooth. I looked at Mark. He was pale now. The bluster was gone. You used my scholarship. I said, you stole the check, deposited it, and then used it to drain more money from the trust. It was a misunderstanding. Cynthia whispered. She was crying now. Delicate, practiced tears. We were going to give it to you eventually. We were drowning. Stella. The business was failing. We didn't want you to worry. I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. I wasn't sad. I wasn't hurt. Those emotions belonged to a daughter. And I wasn't a daughter anymore. I was a creditor. And I was furious. I am not signing anything. I said, Stella, please, Rowan said, standing up as well. If you don't sign the ratification, we can't restructure. The bank will foreclose on the commercial properties. Your parents could lose the house. Good, I said. I picked up the ledger. I am keeping this. I said, you can't take that. Rowan snapped. That is a confidential internal document. I am a beneficiary. I said, it is my money. It is my document. I turned to leave. Mark reached out, grabbing my arm. Stella, don't do this, he hissed. His grip was tight, desperate. If you walk out of here, you are destroying this family. Over money? Over paperwork? After everything we gave you? I looked at his hand on my sleeve. I remembered the budget sheet he had handed me in the kitchen. I remembered him telling me that struggle built character. You gave me nothing, Dad. I said, you sold me. I ripped my arm away and walked out the door. I didn't stop in the lobby. I didn't stop at the elevator. I took the stairs, my heels clacking, echoing in the concrete stairwell, a rhythm of pure adrenaline. I got to my car, got inside, and locked the doors. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't put the key in the ignition. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel, breathing in ragged gasps. I wasn't crying. I was calculating. I drove straight to Naomi's office. I didn't care that she was working. I walked into the legal aid center, past the waiting room full of people holding eviction notices, and found her in her cubicle. She took one look at my face and stood up. Conference room, she said, now. I laid the ledger on the table. I told her everything, the $80,000, the matching grant, the restructuring. Naomi listened, her face getting harder and harder. When I finished, she didn't say anything for a long minute. She just stared at the ledger. This isn't just fraud. Stella, she said softly, this is an industry. They didn't just spend the money. They created a system to extract it. She pulled out her phone. I have a friend, she said, Devin Pike. He is a forensic accountant. He usually works divorce cases, hiding assets, offshore accounts, that kind of thing. You need him. I can't afford a forensic accountant. Naomi, you can't afford not to, she said. And he owes me a favor. I got his sister out of a lease she couldn't pay. We met Devin Pike 2 days later at a diner halfway between Harborside and Marrowgate. He was a small man with nervous energy and glasses that kept sliding down his nose. He drank coffee like it was water. He flipped through the ledger I had stolen. He looked at the photos of the trust documents I had taken from the leather folder. He didn't look shocked. He looked bored, which was somehow more terrifying. It is a classic vampire trust, Devin said, tapping the page with a spoon. A what? I asked. Vampire trust. It is not a legal term, obviously. It is what we call it when the trustees suck the life out of the beneficiary to keep the corpus alive for themselves. He pointed to the entry for the Hale Community Advancement Foundation. See this? He asked. $6,000 for study abroad support. Paid to this foundation. I nodded. I looked up this foundation. Devin said, it is defunct. It lost its 501c3 status 4 years ago. But guess who was the treasurer? I shook my head. Raymond Hale. Devin said, your uncle? Cynthia's brother. I said, he died of a heart attack in 2019. Right, Devin said, but the bank account for the foundation remained open. Your parents transferred money from the trust to the foundation. Claiming it was for your education, then, since they likely had signatory power on the foundation account after your uncle died, they probably withdrew it as administrative fees or reimbursement. He looked at me over his glasses. It is a wash cycle. Stella. They move the money through 3 different hands so that by the time it gets to them, it looks like a business expense. It is controlled consent. They used your name as the key to unlock the doors, but they made sure you never walked through them. He leaned back. They are borrowing against your identity to keep their lifestyle afloat. And if they are asking for a restructuring now, it means they have run out of places to move the debt. They are insolvent. What do I do? I asked. Devin shrugged. You sue them. You compel a full accounting. You expose the fraud. But if I do that, Naomi said, playing devil's advocate, the trust collapses. The assets get liquidated to pay the debts. Stella might get nothing. She might get nothing anyway. Devin said, but if she doesn't act, she might inherit the tax liability for all the money they stole in her name. The IRS treats forgiven debt as income. Stella, if the trust goes bust and writes off those loans to you, you could owe taxes on $80,000 you never touched. I felt cold. The trap was even deeper than I thought. I went home that night and sat in the dark. I thought about Mark's face in the meeting. We were trying to grow it. He believed it. That was the horror. He believed that stealing from me to fund his renovation was actually an investment in the family brand, and therefore, by extension, an investment in me. He had erased the line between himself and his children so completely that he couldn't see where his greed ended and my rights began. I checked my email before bed. There was a message in my spam folder. The sender was em_privateprotonmail.com. The subject line was blank. I opened it. Ms. Jenkins, I am contacting you from a personal account. Do not reply to my work address. I reviewed the older files after you left the meeting. I went into the archives in the basement, the ones Rowan Lusk doesn't check. There are entries that don't reconcile. It is not just the education fund. There are withdrawals listed for medical expenses, travel, and legal defense fees, all attributed to you. All dated during years you were not in contact with your parents. Also, I found a signature authorization form. It names Mark Jenkins as your power of attorney for trust matters. It is dated 3 weeks after your 18th birthday. The signature looks authentic. But the witness signature belongs to a notary who lost her license for fraud in 2020. If you want the truth, we should speak privately. I am not going to lose my license because your parents needed a country club membership. I stared at the screen. Power of attorney. If they had that, if they had forged that, then everything they did was technically legal on paper. They hadn't just stolen my money. They had stolen my consent. I hit reply. Name the place. The cafe Elise Morrow chose was 20 minutes outside of Wexler Falls, tucked into the back of a garden center that smelled of damp earth and fertilizer. It was a place where grandmothers ate scones, not where fiduciaries discussed embezzlement. I arrived 10 minutes early. Elise was already there. She was sitting at a corner table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea, staring out the window at the rows of winter-hardy shrubs. I sat down across from her. I didn't order anything. Why here? I asked. Because Rowan Lusk has cameras in the conference room, Elise said without turning her head. And because I do not like being recorded when I am violating my non-disclosure agreement. She turned to look at me. In the harsh daylight. She looked tired. The professional armor she had worn at the law firm was cracked. She looked like a woman who had realized she was standing in a room filling with gas and was the only one who smelled it. I am not the original trustee, Elise said. She opened her handbag and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the floral tablecloth. I took over the administration of the Jenkins Hale Trust 18 months ago. The previous trustee was a man named Arthur Pendleton. He had been your grandfather's attorney for 30 years. What happened to him? I asked. He resigned, she said, abruptly. The official reason was health issues, early onset dementia. But when I took over the files, I found his notes. He wasn't losing his memory. Stella, he was losing his nerve. I opened the envelope. It contained a timeline, a spreadsheet printed in landscape mode, color-coded by year. Arthur let things slide. Elise explained, pointing to the early entries. He was old school. He believed that the head of the household, your father, knew best. When Mark asked for disbursements, Arthur signed the checks without asking for receipts. He treated the trust like a personal piggy bank for your parents because he didn't want to cause a scene at the country club. She tapped a block of red entries dated from my junior year of college, but then the requests got larger. She said, and the justifications got thinner. Arthur started pushing back, and then, suddenly, he retired. Rowan Lusk brought me in. He told me it was a simple administrative role. Just keep the lights on and the checks clearing. I looked at the red block. Payee, Hale Community Advancement Foundation. Amount, $6,000. Memo, study abroad program fees. I never studied abroad. I said, I spent that summer working double shifts at the bistro. I know. Elise said, I Googled you. I saw your LinkedIn profile. You were a waitress. She leaned in, her voice dropping to a whisper. I pulled the canceled checks from the bank archives. She said, that check to the Hale Community Advancement Foundation? It was endorsed and deposited. But look at the next line. I moved my finger down. Payee, Hale Community Advancement Foundation. Amount, $4,500. Memo, educational supplies. And another, all told. Nearly $40,000 had flowed from the trust to this foundation over a period of 3 years. I don't know what this foundation is. I said, I do, Elise said. It is a zombie. I took the documents to Devin Pike the next morning. Devin was eating a bagel in his office, which was actually the converted garage of his mother's house. He had 3 monitors set up on a folding table, glowing with spreadsheets and database queries. He listened to Elise's theory about the zombie foundation. He wiped crumbs from his chin and started typing. Hale Community Advancement. Devin muttered, let us see who is home. It took him 5 minutes. Here we go, he said. Incorporated in 2010. Mission statement: to provide educational resources to underprivileged youth in rural Vermont. Treasurer, Raymond Hale. My uncle. I said, right, Devin said. And here is the dissolution paperwork. The foundation lost its tax-exempt status 5 years ago for failure to file annual returns. But, and this is the kicker, the bank account didn't close. He spun the monitor around. The signatories on the account were updated after Raymond died. Devin said, guess who took over control? I didn't need to guess. Mark and Cynthia Jenkins. I said, bingo. Devin said, it is a pass-through entity. Stella, a laundering machine. They move money from the trust to the foundation, claiming it is for your education. Since the foundation's mission is educational, it looks legitimate to a lazy trustee like Arthur Pendleton. Then, once the money is in the foundation's account, Mark and Cynthia withdraw it as administrative expenses, or salary, or reimbursement. He leaned back in his chair. It is clever, he admitted. In a sick way, they used a dead man's charity to steal from a living daughter. I looked at the screen. I felt a strange, cold detachment. It was the same feeling I got when I analyzed a failing supply chain at work. I wasn't looking at a family anymore. I was looking at a series of inefficiencies and corrupted nodes. Print it, I said. I drove to Cedar Hollow on a Saturday. I didn't call first. The house looked perfect. The lawn was raked. The shutters were painted a fresh, crisp black. It was a stage set for a play about a happy, successful family. I walked in through the front door. I still had a key, though I rarely used it. Mark was in the living room, watching golf. Cynthia was flipping through a catalog. They looked up, startled, their faces shifting from confusion to that practiced, welcoming warmth. "Stella!" Cynthia cried, starting to rise. "We weren't expecting you. Is everything okay?" I didn't answer. I walked to the coffee table and dropped the stack of papers Devin had printed. They landed with a heavy thud, sliding across the glossy magazines. "What is this?" Mark asked, muting the television. "It is the ledger for the Hale Community Advancement Foundation." I said. The room went very still. Cynthia froze halfway out of her chair. Mark stared at the papers, his face draining of color. "I know how you did it," I said. My voice was calm. I wasn't yelling. I didn't feel like yelling. I felt like I was reading a eulogy. "You transferred money from grandfather's trust to Uncle Raymond's foundation. You claimed it was for my tuition. You claimed it was for my study abroad, and then you paid yourselves." Mark stood up. He tried to muster some indignation, but it was thin, like paper. "You don't understand the complexity of these things." Stella, he said, it was logistics. Just logistics. We were moving assets to protect them from tax liabilities. It was all for the family estate. For the family? I asked. I pointed to a line item. You took $6,000 for a study abroad trip I never took. Where did that money go? Dad? Did it go to the estate? Or did it go to the contractor who built your new deck? Cynthia walked over to him. She put a hand on his arm, but she was looking at me. Her eyes were hard. You were so stubborn, she said. I blinked. What? You wouldn't let us help you, she said. Her voice rose, gaining strength. You wanted to be so independent. You wanted to prove you could do it all alone. We had expenses. Stella, we had a lifestyle to maintain for your brother, for the community. We had to keep up appearances. If we had told people we were broke, it would have ruined Mark's business. We had to handle it somehow. She looked at me like I was the villain. If you had just let us pay for college the normal way, we wouldn't have had to move the money around like that. She said, but you insisted on loans. You insisted on working. So we had to access the funds a different way. We couldn't let that money just sit there when we needed it. I stared at her. The logic was breathtaking. She was blaming my independence for her embezzlement. She was saying that my refusal to take their money forced them to steal it. You are saying, I said slowly, that because I worked 3 jobs and ate instant oatmeal for 4 years, you felt entitled to $40,000 of my trust fund? It wasn't your money, Mark shouted. He lost control then. He threw his hands up. It was Graham's money. It was my father-in-law's money. It belonged to us. You were just the vehicle. The vehicle. Something inside me broke. It wasn't my heart. It was the last lingering thread of the story I had told myself for 9 years. I had believed I was a survivor. I had believed that their refusal to pay for college was a cruel, misguided attempt to teach me grit. I had believed they were strict, harsh, maybe even unloving, but that they had a philosophy. But there was no philosophy. There was no lesson. I wasn't a student they were teaching. I was an asset they were liquidating. I looked at the room, the expensive furniture, the art on the walls, the new renovation. It was all fake. It was all built on the bones of my credit score and the corpse of my grandfather's trust. I felt a wave of grief so heavy I almost sat down. I wasn't grieving the money. I could earn money. I was grieving the reality I had lost. I was grieving the years I spent hating myself for being poor, thinking I wasn't working hard enough. When all along, the safety net existed. They had just cut it down and woven it into a hammock for themselves. I am not a vehicle, I said softly. I am a beneficiary, and I am going to audit you into the ground. I turned and walked out. You can't prove intent, Mark yelled after me. It was administrative. I got in my car and drove away. I didn't cry. I was done crying for them. The next week was a blur of paperwork. I treated the situation like a hostile takeover. I hired a lawyer, a friend of Naomi's named Sarah, who drafted formal demand letters. We requested a full accounting of the trust from inception. We requested bank records for the Hale Foundation. We requested copies of all correspondence with the Alderwood Promise Fund. 3 days later, I received a response from Rowan Lusk. It wasn't a packet of records. It was a single page, written on heavy bond paper. Dear Ms. Jenkins, we are in receipt of your demands. Please be advised that your interpretation of complex fiduciary matters appears to be flawed. The distributions in question were made within the discretionary powers of the trustees. Furthermore, continued aggressive litigation against the trust will necessitate the retention of specialized defense counsel. Under the terms of the trust instrument, all legal fees incurred by the trustees in their defense will be paid from the trust corpus, if you persist. You will likely deplete the very assets you claim to seek. We suggest you accept the restructuring proposal and allow the family to move forward. It was a threat. Sue us, and we will spend your inheritance to fight you. I read the letter at my desk at North Bay Strategy Group. I was shaking with rage. They were holding the money hostage, using it to pay for the lawyers who would help them keep it. Jenkins? I looked up. My boss, David, was standing in the doorway of my cubicle. We just landed the consulting contract for the Cedar Hollow revitalization project. David said, "It is a big one. Since you are from there, I thought you might want to be on the team. You know the local landscape." My heart skipped a beat. Cedar Hollow? Sure, I said. Send me the preliminary files. David forwarded the dossier. I opened it. It was a list of local stakeholders, contractors, and vendors who had been pre-approved for the town center redevelopment. I scanned the list. I saw the usual names, construction firms, engineering groups, and then, under Interior Design and Consultation, I saw it, Cynthia Jenkins Interiors, and under Project Management Support, M. Jenkins Consulting. I clicked on the vendor profile for M. Jenkins Consulting. It was a shell. The address was their home address. The projects listed were vague. Strategic advising for private trusts. They weren't just stealing from the past. They were leveraging the future. They had used their local influence bought with the money they stole from me, to position themselves as vendors for a multi-million-dollar town project. If they got these contracts, they would be flush with cash again. They would be able to pay off the debts, hide the paper trail, and pretend none of this ever happened. They would win. I printed the vendor list. I added it to my folder. That evening, I got another email from Elise. "Meet me. Same place. Tonight." It was raining again when I got to the Garden Center Cafe. Elise looked even worse than before. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her hands were shaking as she poured sugar into her tea. "Devin found something," I said, sitting down. "I know what he found," Elise said, "but I found something worse." She slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a photocopy of a document titled Durable Power of Attorney. It was dated September 14th, 2018, 3 weeks after I left for college. It granted Mark Jenkins full authority to act as my agent in all financial and legal matters, specifically regarding trust distributions and banking inquiries. At the bottom of the page was a signature, Stella Jenkins. I looked at it. It was a good forgery, better than the one at the bank. The slant was right. The loop on the J was almost perfect, but the spacing was off. I crowd my letters when I sign. This signature was spacious, airy. It was the signature of someone who wasn't afraid of running out of room. "I didn't sign this." I said, "I know." Elise said, "How do you know?" "Because of the witness," she said. She pointed to the notary stamp at the bottom. "Barbara Miller." "Who is Barbara Miller?" "She was a clerk at Rowan Lusk's office." Elise said, "She lost her notary commission in 2020. She was caught notarizing documents for clients who weren't in the room. She admitted to batch notarizing signatures for Rowan to speed up closings." Elise looked at me, her eyes intense. "Rowan Lusk papered this. Stella, he knew your parents needed access to the trust. He knew Arthur Pendleton was getting nervous. So he had them create this POA. It gave Mark legal cover to request the money in your name, if anyone asked. Mark could just wave this paper and say, 'I am acting as her agent.'" She leaned forward. "This isn't just theft anymore. It is conspiracy. It involves a lawyer, a notary. And your parents. Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "You are a trustee. If this blows up, you could go down with them." Elise let out a bitter laugh. "I am already down. Stella, when I took this job, I signed off on the previous year's accounting. I validated the opening balances. If the state bar investigates, they will say I was negligent. They will say I should have caught it." She paused, taking a sip of tea. "But if a beneficiary discovers fraud and brings a claim, and if the current trustee assists that beneficiary in recovering the assets, then I am a whistleblower. I am a victim of the previous administration, not a co-conspirator." She looked at me with cold calculation. "I need you to blow this up. Stella, I need you to file a petition to remove the trustees for cause. I need you to demand a forensic audit in open court. If you do that, I can testify, I can produce the files, but I can't do it unilaterally. I need a plaintiff. So you are using me, too." I said, "Yes," Elise said simply. "But unlike your parents, I am offering you a weapon, not a debt. I took the POA document. I will file, I said. The hearing was set for 3 weeks later. We filed in Wexler Falls Probate Court. My lawyer, Sarah, drafted a petition that was 20 pages long. It detailed the timeline, the fake foundation, the matching grant theft, and the forged power of attorney. We sent copies to Mark, Cynthia, and Rowan Lusk. The silence that followed was terrifying. No angry texts, no threatening letters, just a vacuum. 2 days before the hearing, I was in my apartment in Harborside. I was organizing the exhibits for court. Exhibit A, the scholarship letter. Exhibit B, the bank ledger. Exhibit C, the forged POA. My buzzer rang at 9 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone. I looked at the grainy black and white video feed. It was Cynthia. She was wearing a trench coat, soaked from the rain. She wasn't wearing makeup. Her hair was plastered to her forehead. She looked small, old, and pathetic. I debated not answering. I debated calling the police, but I pressed the button. She came up the stairs slowly. When I opened the door, she didn't hug me. She didn't smile. She stood in the hallway, dripping water onto my welcome mat. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was a whisper. I stepped aside. She walked into my living room. She looked at the sparse furniture, the clean lines, the lack of clutter. She looked at the stack of legal files on my dining table. "You live very neatly," she said. "What do you want?" "Mom?" I asked. I stood by the door. I didn't offer her a seat. She turned to face me. Her face crumpled. It wasn't the pretty, delicate crying she did at parties. This was ugly crying. Her face turned blotchy. Her nose ran. "Please stop," she sobbed. I watched her. I waited for the apology. I waited for her to say, "I am sorry we hurt you. I am sorry we lied." "If you go into that courtroom on Tuesday," she said, her voice shaking, "you will destroy us. Mark will lose his license. The business will fold. We will lose the house. We will be bankrupt. Stella, we will go to jail." She reached out, grabbing my hand. Her fingers were ice cold. "Is that what you want? Do you want to see your father in prison? Do you want to be the daughter who put her parents on the street?" I pulled my hand away. "I didn't put you there," I said. "You spent 10 years building that prison. You built it with my money. We can fix it," she pleaded. "We can work out a payment plan. The Cedar Hollow project is coming through. We will pay you back, every cent. Just drop the petition. Sign the restructuring agreement. Give us time." I looked at her. She wasn't sorry. She didn't regret taking the money. She didn't regret the years of stress she had caused me. She only regretted that she had been caught. She was negotiating. She was trying to trade my justice for her comfort. She was asking me to subsidize their survival one last time, not with money, but with my silence. I walked to the table and picked up the forged power of attorney. "Did you sign this?" I asked. Cynthia froze. She looked at the paper. "I asked you a question." I said, "Did you sign my name? Or did Mark?" She looked down at the floor. "We had to," she whispered. "You weren't there." "I wasn't there because you wouldn't pay for the train ticket," I said. I put the paper back on the stack. "Go home, Mom." She stared at me. The sobbing stopped. Her face hardened. The mask slipped back into place. "You are cold, Stella," she said. "You are so cold. We raised you to be strong, but we didn't raise you to be cruel." I opened the door. "You didn't raise me at all," I said. "I raised myself, and the woman I raised doesn't make deals with thieves." She walked out. She didn't look back. I locked the door. I slid the deadbolt home. I went back to the table and picked up the file labeled Hearing Prep. I wasn't cold. I was just finally truly independent. The hearing took place in room 3B of the Wexler Falls Probate Court. It was a small room, shockingly ordinary for a place where a family was about to be dismantled. There was no mahogany gallery, no high ceilings, just acoustic tile that was stained with water damage and a low hum from a fluorescent light that flickered every 10 seconds. I arrived 20 minutes early. I wore the same charcoal suit I had worn to the trust meeting. I sat on a wooden bench in the hallway, my hands folded in my lap. Naomi sat next to me. She didn't hold my hand. She knew I didn't want comfort. She just sat there, a solid presence of legal fury. Scrolling through the exhibit list on her tablet, Devin Pike was not there physically, but he was on standby via video link, ready to testify as an expert witness regarding the forensic accounting. At 8:50, the elevator doors opened. Mark and Cynthia stepped out. They were dressed for a performance. Mark wore a soft gray cardigan instead of a suit jacket, trying to look like a kindly, harmless grandfather. Cynthia wore a modest navy dress and flats, her hair pulled back loosely. They walked close together, touching arms. They looked fragile. They looked like confused elderly parents who were being dragged into court by an ungrateful child. It was a masterclass in optics. They saw me. Cynthia's eyes welled up instantly, a reflex she seemed to have perfected. Mark gave me a sad, tight nod. They didn't approach. They walked to the other side of the hallway and stood with Rowan Lusk, who was whispering urgently into their ears. We went inside. The judge, the Honorable Evelyn Vance, was a woman with sharp features and reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. She looked like she had zero patience for drama. "We are here in the matter of the Jenkins Hale Living Trust," Judge Vance said, shuffling papers. "Petition for removal of trustees and demand for accounting." Rowan Lusk stood up first. He buttoned his jacket. He had the slick, confident air of a man who believed he could talk his way out of a burning building. "Your Honor," he began, his voice smooth and respectful, "this entire proceeding is a tragic misunderstanding. The petitioners are characterizing complex family estate planning as malfeasance. The truth is much simpler. The trustees, Mark and Cynthia Jenkins, have devoted their lives to preserving the legacy of Graham Hale for the benefit of their children." He gestured to my parents, who looked down at the table with appropriate humility, the withdrawals in question. Rowan continued, "Were made for the benefit of the beneficiary, Stella Jenkins. However, we were dealing with a unique situation. The beneficiary was estranged. She was young, headstrong, and refused direct financial assistance. She insisted on what she called independence." He turned to look at me. His expression was almost pitying. "The family was forced to manage her support indirectly." Rowan said, "They moved funds to be available for her. They covered expenses that would have otherwise fallen on the family estate if she had failed. They were creating a safety net. Your Honor, the fact that Stella refused to use it does not mean the trustees were stealing. It means they were parenting a difficult child from a distance." I sat there, listening to him rewrite my history. He was turning my starvation into their benevolence. He was arguing that because I wouldn't take their money, they had a right to spend it on themselves under the guise of indirect support. "Ms. Jenkins," Judge Vance said, looking at me. I stood up. My lawyer, Sarah, guided me to the witness stand. I swore to tell the truth. "Ms. Jenkins," Sarah asked, "did you ever refuse financial aid from your parents?" "Yes," I said. "And why was that?" "Because they told me they would not give it." I said. I looked directly at the judge. On the day I received my college acceptance letter, my parents sat me down at their kitchen table. They gave me a budget sheet. They told me that paying for my education would deprive me of the gift of independence. They told me to work. "And did you work?" Sarah asked. "I worked 3 jobs." I said. My voice was steady, but I could feel the tremor in my hands, so I gripped the railing of the witness box. I worked at the campus library from 5 in the morning until 8. I tutored in the afternoons. I waited tables at a bistro until 1 in the morning. "Did your parents ever offer to pay for your housing?" Sarah asked. "No. I lived in a basement apartment with no heat in the bedroom. I slept in a sleeping bag on top of my mattress during the winter." "Did they pay for your food?" "No. I ate 1 meal a day for 3 years. Rowan Lusk stood up. "Objection. Relevance? The witness's dietary habits are not on trial." "Overruled," Judge Vance said. She was watching me closely. "Go on." "Ms. Jenkins." I took a breath. "I am not trying to solicit pity." "Your Honor." I said, "I am establishing a timeline. Mr. Lusk claims that $80,000 was withdrawn from the trust to support me. He claims it was indirect support. I am telling you that during the years those withdrawals were made, I was calculating whether I could afford to fill a cavity or if I should just let the tooth rot. I saw Cynthia flinch in the gallery. She looked down at her hands. If that money was for me, I said, I never saw it, I never felt it, and I certainly never authorized it. Independence wasn't a philosophy I was playing with. It was survival. I stepped down. The room felt colder. Then Sarah called Elise Morrow. Elise walked to the stand. She didn't look at Rowan Lusk. She carried a thick binder. Ms. Morrow, Sarah asked, you are the current independent trustee? I am, Elise said. And you have reviewed the ledger of the trust? I have. Does the ledger match the bank records? Elise opened her binder. No, it does not. Can you explain? Elise put on her reading glasses. She spoke with the dry, precise tone of a woman who loved numbers more than people. There are 19 separate entries labeled Stella Jenkins, Education Support, Elise said. They total $82,000. I attempted to reconcile these withdrawals with the actual expenses of the beneficiary. She held up a page. Here is a withdrawal for $6,000 dated June 2019. The memo says, study abroad. However, the check was made out to the Hale Community Advancement Foundation. And what is that foundation? Sarah asked. It is a defunct entity, Elise said. It lost its tax-exempt status in 2015. The signatory on the bank account for the foundation is Mark Jenkins. Rowan Lusk jumped up. Your Honor, this is hearsay. The witness cannot know the internal operations of that foundation. I have the bank records, Elise said calmly. Pulling a document from the binder, we subpoenaed them. The $6,000 went from the trust into the foundation. 3 days later, $5,500 was withdrawn from the foundation via a check made out to cash. The judge leaned forward. Cash? Yes, Your Honor, Elise said. Endorsed by Mark Jenkins. The room went silent. Even the hum of the light seemed to stop. That is not indirect support, Judge Vance said, her voice sharp. That is laundering. Rowan Lusk looked pale. He whispered something to Mark. Mark was shaking his head, his face red, whispering back furiously. But we weren't done. Your Honor, Sarah said, we would like to introduce a new piece of evidence. This was uncovered by our forensic accountant. Mr. Pike, in the digital discovery provided by the defense yesterday, she handed a piece of paper to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. This is an email chain, Sarah explained, dated August 14th, 2018. It is between Cynthia Jenkins and Mark Jenkins. I looked at my mother. She had stopped crying. She was staring at the table, her face like stone. Sarah read the email aloud. Mark, I just moved the tuition funds to the foundation account. I am worried Stella will see the trust statement if it comes to the house. We need to make sure she stays off the books. If she sees how much is there, she will ask questions. We need to stick to the script. We are tapped out. It is the only way to keep control of the principal. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach. Stick to the script. It wasn't a lesson. It wasn't about character. It was a script. They had written a play where I was the struggling protagonist, solely so they could rob the box office. Rowan Lusk stood up, but he looked defeated. Your Honor, that email is taken out of context. Control of the principal refers to investment strategy. Sit down, Mr. Lusk, Judge Vance said. Her voice was ice. I looked at Mark. He was staring at me. His eyes were wide, desperate. He looked like a man who was watching his house burn down and realized he was still inside. There is one more thing, Elise said from the stand. She turned a page in her binder. In reviewing the trust outflows, I found another pattern. There is a secondary series of withdrawals starting in 2020. They are labeled Venture Capital Support. She looked at the defense table. These withdrawals total $45,000. They were paid to a company called Green Horizon Ventures. I frowned. I had never heard of Green Horizon Ventures. We traced the company registration. Elise said, "The sole proprietor is Evan Jenkins." My breath caught in my throat. Evan, my brother, the one who was fragile, the one who needed a soft place to land. The withdrawals coincide with the dates of Evan's failed startup in Burlington. Elise continued, "The juice bar concept. I remembered that. Evan had tried to start a business. It had folded in 6 months. He had told me he lost his savings. Mark had told me they were proud of him for trying. The trust paid for it." Elise said, "And the funds used to pay for it came from the account that was designated for Stella's education." I sat back on the bench. The wood felt hard against my spine. They hadn't just stolen from me to renovate their kitchen. They had stolen from me to fund Evan. My struggle. My nights shelving books. My hunger. My panic attacks. My cracked tooth. It wasn't just greed. It was a transfer of wealth. They had siphoned my safety net and given it to my brother, because they liked him better, because he was compliant, because he didn't ask questions. My independence had financed his failure. "That is enough," Judge Vance said. She slammed the file shut. She looked at Mark and Cynthia. "This court has seen many disputes," she said, "but rarely have I seen such a calculated dismantling of a beneficiary's rights. You didn't just breach your fiduciary duty, you engaged in a systematic deception of your own daughter." Mark stood up. "It was for the family," he burst out. Rowan Lusk tried to grab his arm, but Mark shook him off. He stepped away from the table. He looked wild, his hair disheveled. The calm grandfather act completely gone. He looked at me, not at the judge, at me. "Stella, you don't understand," he pleaded, his voice cracked. "We were drowning. The business was under. The house was leveraged. We had to keep the family afloat. If we lost the house, we lost everything. We did it for you, for Evan." He walked toward the railing. The bailiff stepped forward, hand on his belt. "We were going to put it back," Mark yelled. "Once the Cedar Hollow deal went through, we were going to put it all back. We just needed time. You were strong, Stella. You could handle the work. Evan couldn't. We had to protect the weakest link." I looked at him. He truly believed it. In his twisted, narcissistic mind, my strength was a resource he was entitled to harvest. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as a draft horse that could pull the cart while Evan rode in the back. He thought survival was consent. I stood up. I walked to the railing. I stood 3 feet from him. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It wasn't hate. It was pity. He was so small. He was a thief who thought he was a patriarch. He had sold his own child for a kitchen renovation and a country club membership. And he called it love. "You didn't protect the family." "Dad," I said. My voice was quiet, but in that small room, it sounded like a gavel. "You ate it." Mark froze. He looked at me, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face. "I am sorry," he whispered. I looked at him. I saw the trap. He wanted me to say it was okay. He wanted me to absorb the blow one last time so he could feel like a good man. I didn't say it. Judge Vance banged her gavel. "Order!" she barked. "Mr. Jenkins, sit down or I will have you removed." Mark collapsed back into his chair. Cynthia was sobbing now, her face buried in her hands. Judge Vance adjusted her glasses. "I am ordering a continuance," she said. "I am granting the petition for a full forensic audit, to be conducted by Mr. Pike's firm at the expense of the trustees personally. I am also freezing all assets of the Jenkins-Hale Trust and the personal assets of Mark and Cynthia Jenkins until this accounting is complete." She paused, looking at the email evidence on her desk. "Furthermore," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous register, "given the evidence of forgery and the use of a defunct charitable entity to conceal funds, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into fraud and embezzlement." Rowan Lusk closed his eyes. He knew his career was over. Cynthia let out a wail. The judge looked at me. "Ms. Jenkins," she said, "I am sorry this happened to you." "Thank you, Your Honor," I said, The gavel came down. I turned and walked out of the courtroom. Naomi was right beside me, in the hallway. Mark and Cynthia were huddled together, clutching each other. They looked at me as I passed. They looked like they wanted to speak, to beg, to explain. I didn't stop. I walked past them like they were strangers. The word family didn't mean anything anymore. Now, there were only records. There was only liability, and there was the truth. I walked out into the sunlight of the parking lot. The air was cold and clean. I took a deep breath. It was the first breath I had taken in 9 years that didn't cost me anything. I was free. Thank you for listening to this story. It has been a journey through betrayal, gaslighting, and the hard-won fight for truth. If you enjoyed Stella's story, please let me know in the comments where you are listening from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you want to hear more stories about justice served cold, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. Don't forget to share your thoughts in English in the comments below. Do you think Stella should have forgiven them? Or was she right to walk away? I read every single one. See you in the next story.